Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the hidden mechanics behind electricity costs. You know, if you follow grid economics, it can sometimes feel like a total black box. But we're going to pry that box open right now and break it down piece by piece, looking at the exact frameworks dictating how power is actually priced. Let's get into it. So, let's start with the big core question driving all of this. Why does the exact same amount of electricity, literally an identical commodity, cost radically different amounts depending on where you physically sit on the grid? I mean, you'd think a megawatt hour is just a megawatt hour, right? Well, actually, no. On the power grid, location is absolutely everything. The physical geography of the grid completely rewrites the financial reality of the power flowing through it. The secret behind that geographic mystery? It's called LMP, or Locational Marginal Price. Simply put, this is the final price the market clears at to deliver energy to your specific local node at a highly specific moment in time. It's the ultimate price tag, the bottom line of what you pay or receive. But here's the catch. That singular number is kind of an illusion. It's actually masking a wildly complex calculation right beneath the surface. To really understand that calculation, we have to look at how grid operators, like CAISO for example, break that total price down into a four-part mathematical equation. The final LMP is built out of the MCE, the MCC, the MCL, and the MGHG. Yeah, I know, it looks like a total bowl of alphabet soup right now, but stick with me. By the end of this explainer, you'll see exactly how every single one of those technical variables stacks up to create the true price of power. Section 1. The price of power. Understanding the foundation. Okay, to make this whole thing a lot easier to digest, let's split this formula into two distinct buckets. On one side, we have a system-wide base cost. Think of this as the raw, underlying cost of energy before anything complicated gets in the way. On the other side, we have our location-specific effects. These are the real-world, physical, and policy modifiers that warp that base price, all depending on exactly where the power is heading. So it's base reality versus local reality. Section 2, the base energy cost, the foundation of the formula. We're going to build up our price tag starting with that pure foundation, and that starts with the MCE, the marginal cost of energy. This is your absolute baseline. It's the cost of the next cheapest megawatt hour available system-wide, completely ignoring any geographic baggage. Imagine just for a second a perfect frictionless grid where every generator and every consumer exist in the exact same physical space. The MCE is the price you'd pay in that perfect, though obviously physically impossible world. So the most crucial takeaway here is that the MCE is just asking the most foundational question possible. What does energy cost in general? It sets the floor. Before we even start worrying about how to physically route the power to your house, we just need to know what it costs to spin up that next unit of power on a macro, system-wide level. Section 3, Grid Traffic and Physics, the physical modifiers. All right, let's inject some physical reality into our grid and see what happens to our price, because as we all know, the grid is anything but frictionless. Our first reality check is the MCC, or the Marginal Cost of Congestion. Just like major highways at rush hour, transmission lines have hard physical limits. When those lines get too crowded, grid operators have to route power through different, often much costlier paths just to reach your node. The MCC is basically a financial toll for those grid traffic jams. It captures the extra cost, or hey, sometimes a credit, incurred strictly because of transmission bottlenecks. In fact, if lines get so congested that there's literally nowhere for excess power to go, this toll can actually flip negative, meaning generators will literally pay you to take power off the grid. Crazy, right? So intuitively, the MCC is just asking a highly practical question. How much more or less are we paying because this specific node is super hard to reach due to grid constraints? If your local node sits behind a bunch of heavily congested lines, well, your MCC is absolutely going to reflect the expensive acrobatics required to push that power past the bottleneck. Next up is the MCL, the Marginal Cost of Losses, and this one is all about the literal physics of electricity. Look, as power travels across miles and miles of transmission lines, it encounters electrical resistance. That resistance generates heat, and that heat represents lost energy. You literally bleed a fraction of the power just trying to move it from point A to point B. The MCL is the financial adjustment for those physical losses. What's really fascinating here is how raw, unfiltered physics translates directly into dollars and cents. The MCL asks how much more because power is lost getting there. The further the power has to travel to reach you, or the less efficient the lines are along the way, the more energy just evaporates as heat. And the market doesn't just write off that lost energy. No, it charges for it, right here in the MCL.
Section 4. The Carbon Compliance Cost. The Policy Modifier.
So we've got our base cost, we've handled the traffic jams, and we've accounted for the laws of physics. But we aren't done yet. Beyond physics and traffic, we also have to deal with environmental policy. And that brings us to our final variable, the MGHG, or Marginal Greenhouse Gas Cost. This piece adds the real-world cost of carbon compliance right into the mix. It captures the costs tied to greenhouse gas regulations for the energy serving your node. This is especially huge when you're dealing with energy imbalance markets, or anytime power is being imported across paths that span different regulatory borders. This is essentially a carbon toll paid along the path to the final destination. It asks, how much more are we paying because of carbon compliance costs on the path to this node? It's the grid's way of ensuring that the environmental cost, as dictated by local policy, is baked perfectly into the localized price of the power getting delivered. Section 5. Reassembling the final price. Putting the pieces together. All right, we've successfully torn the formula apart. Now let's put the whole thing back together and see how these pieces stack up. Step 1. We start with our base energy price, the MCE, our perfect system-wide cost. Step 2. We add our congestion premium, the MCC, adjusting for all those grid traffic jams. Step 3. We add the loss adjustment, the MCL, literally paying for the heat lost to physical resistance. And finally, step 4, we tack on the GHG allowance, the MGHG, to cover the required environmental policy costs. When you combine all of that, you get the total locational marginal price. Those 4 components, energy price, congestion premium, loss adjustment, and GHG allowance, make up the single, unified price you actually pay or receive at your local node. It's not a random number at all, is it? It's a highly specific, totally logical aggregation of macroeconomics, traffic routing, physics, and policy. And you have to remember the sheer, staggering scale of what we're talking about here. This entire complex calculation, it isn't just done once a year or once a month. It is calculated dynamically, constantly clearing the market for every single megawatt hour of energy delivered across the entire grid. Every time 1 unit of energy flows, this 4-part equation fires off and dictates its exact localized value. So I'm going to leave you with a final thought to chew on. We've seen exactly how this formula penalizes distance through the cost of losses, how it penalizes bottlenecks through the cost of congestion, and how it adjusts for policy borders. Based on this very specific mathematical reality, where exactly do you think the absolute cheapest, most cost-effective node on the grid is hiding? Think about the physical and geographic implications of everything we just covered. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the mechanics behind the systems we rely on every single day.